So the yardmaster called and said, yeah, I'm gonna hold you out there at Milwaukee Interchange. We'll let you know when we got a track for you. Okay, so we pull down and stop and dial back the chairs and kind of zone out. After a few minutes, the radio comes to life and it's the dispatcher calling. And she said, 4368 East, what I thought she said was, can you give the Menifee block back now? And I was kind of bleary and I said, you know, put the rope around my neck and tightened it. No, I can't give you the Menifee block back. We're sitting in it. Silence. She comes on and says, 4368 East with Engineer Nichols. You're authorized eastward 1 block Menifee. I pull out the paper and, oh shit. And Randy, my conductor, he's over there. What's the problem? I said, just put the noose around your neck, tighten it up. Okay, hi, I'm Ken Nichols. I hired out with the SP in April of '77 as a switchman brakeman. I transferred into engine service in '79, promoted engineer in '81, worked as both a fireman and engineer up through '90. And then in 1990, I got a transfer to Portland, where I went into at the bottom of the seniority list again, which put me on the Extraboard for the most part for pretty much all of the next 3 years until 1993, when they leased the branch lines out in the Willamette Valley to Genesee and Wyoming, forming the Willamette and Pacific Railroad. And so I went to work for them in February of '93. Came on as an engineer, number 3 on the seniority list. January 1st, 1994, I became the road foreman. Served in that capacity till September of 2002. Went back to my seniority, worked as an engineer until retiring in October of 2022. That's it in a nutshell. Since my career started on the SP in 1977, I worked with a lot of old heads, you know, from back in the 40s. Most of the 40, 41, 42 guys were thinning out. You know, there weren't too many of them left. There were a lot of them from the 50s and, of course, the 60s. And so the stories that I heard span many years. Coming from a railroad family, I heard a lot of stories about these guys from my dad, because when my dad, you know, had hired out in the 40s, he had quite a few of them. Some of them were kind of funny. One of my favorite ones that he used to tell was when he was a fireman on one of the Sacramento locals between Oakland and Sacramento and back. They would go up to Sacramento and lay over, and then work one of the locals back. Well, this particular time they had a Pacific type locomotive, a 2400, and they were over in the Sacramento Roundhouse getting it ready to go to take it out and couple it to the train. And the engineer would normally get down on the ground with his long oiler and put oil in the various cups that were on bearings, on the rods, on the a lot more stuff than I could tell you. My brother could. But at one point there was one little oil cup that he couldn't reach because one of the rods was in the way. Well, my dad, being the fireman, was up in the cab getting his fire ready, and the engineer hollered up to him, hey Kenny, pull her ahead a couple of feet so I can reach this oil cup. Oh sure, my dad says. So he plops down on the engineer's seat and grabs the throttle and cracks it open a little bit and wonders, why is it not moving? What's going on? Leaves it open, and realizes, oh, I forgot to release the brakes. So now all this live steam is in the cylinders, and when he released the brakes, the driver just went and sitting in the shop area where there was muddy, oily water everywhere, it just covered this engineer with oily water. So, and he had white overalls on too. So he comes up and he's all drenched, and all he said to my dad was, "That's the worst I've ever gotten." Yeah, so that was a learning experience for my dad, you know, release the brakes before you open the throttle. And also, you know, something that unique to steam engines is when you open that throttle, the steam pressure goes in, and eventually it's going to build up to full boiler pressure. And if you still got the brakes on, which, you know, overcome the steam pressure, when you let them off, they are going to go. Yeah, so that was a good one. And he's had a lot of nicknames for a lot of the engineers that he worked with, many of which I can't really remember right now, except Turkey Neck Flynn, because apparently he was had a really long neck. And when when my dad fired for him on switch engines, the way he stuck his head out the cab window looking for signals, it's like his neck went up and went like this. So he got the name Turkey Neck Flynn. Another story that came from an old head that was a guy that was actually a little ahead of my dad in seniority. Kenny Elson was his name. He told about one time he was firing on one of those Sacramento locals with a Pacific, coming back to Oakland, and they had made their station stop in Martinez and got the high ball, and they took off. And of course, you know, as the engineer's working the engine more, the fireman has to adjust the firing valve and feed water pump and all these things while they're accelerating. And so going along the bay there west of Martinez, they got up to track speed, which I think was 45 or 50 at the time. And then the engineer backs off on the throttle and they get everything set, and they're just cruising. And so Kenny had the firing valve set and the feed water valve set, and everything was good. And he lights up a cigarette, takes a puff, looks outside and says, "Boy, it sure is a nice night out tonight." And the engineer, being half deaf like they were, says, "What's that? There's a light out?" Shuts the throttle off, puts the brakes on, because, you know, light out is in a signal out. And all the firing mechanisms were set up for cruising at 45 miles an hour. Well, all of a sudden, there's no draft because he shut the throttle off, and all the smoke and everything comes right back out into the cab. And they come to a screeching halt, and he gets ready to flag the block, and the dust clears, and Kenny says, "No, I didn't say a light was out. I said it's a nice night out." And this hoghead says, "Nice night out? I can see it's a nice night out. Just pay attention to your job." And off they went. You know, of course, all they got all over them was a little smoke and maybe some sand, but it just, it wasn't quite as bad as when my dad covered that engineer up in Sacramento. Yeah, so there were a lot of stories like that, you know, from the old heads. There were some humorous stories also. A couple of them from the 50s I'll share. There was a situation where a crew was handling a train from Roseville and got off towards Oakland. They got off the main line at Suisun Fairfield, and they went on the branch over to Shellville, which is where the SP connected with the Northwestern Pacific. And so a lot of traffic came off the NWP, so there were a lot of trains going and coming. Well, this train that they were on came down out of Roseville and set out to the point when they left Napa Junction, it was just 3 units and a caboose. And they're on their way over to Roseville, 3 Baldwin road switchers. Well, this engineer did something that was highly against the rules. He used a plug in the independent so he wouldn't have to bail off every time he set the air. And of course, you know, a couple of reasons for that. Just one less movement you had to make. Plus, when you bailed off on those units, all of that main reservoir pressure would, when you let off on it, would come out right into the cab, and it was deafeningly loud. So to avoid that noise, and of course they didn't use earplugs back in the 50s, it was just bailed off all the time thanks to this plug. So after, they were probably on duty like 15 hours at this time, because it was, you know, the old days, the old hours of service law. And the engineer, Ernie Pinelli, was probably not thinking straight, getting kind of tired. They left Napa Junction and they headed for the Napa River drawbridge, known as the Brazos Bridge. And the bridge was open. And so Pinelli starts using the air to slow down, thinking he has a train, the automatic, not the independent, the automatic. So the only brakes he's getting is on the caboose. And this one little old light caboose is trying to stop or slow down 3 heavy Baldwin 6-axle road switchers, and it's not doing a very good job. And Pinelli panics and plugs it, and him and the fireman jump before it goes over the edge and down into the Napa River. So the guys on the caboose, all they know is, we just went into emergency, what's going on? And when they stop, the conductor looks out and sees his engineer standing on the ground. The brakeman sees his fireman standing on the ground over here, because 2 of the units were down in the drink, and apparently the third one was teetering on the edge. Yeah, so Ernie Pinelli got fired for that. And like happened most of the time back in those days, when you got fired, it had to be after multiple offenses or something really, really, really serious to stay fired. Most of the time you would be reinstated by the superintendent. And he was off for quite a while, and when he was reinstated, he was restricted to yard service. They didn't trust him out on the main line anymore. So the very first day he came back to work, he was on a switch engine in Richmond, California. Daylight job, goes out, gets the engine ready to go, and when the crew is ready to come out and start switching, they walk out of the shanty, they've all got life preservers around their necks. And that just sent Pinelli into orbit. And he would just go nuts when people would call him the Admiral, Flipper, a bunch of other names that I can't think of right offhand, and swore till the day he died that that there was something wrong with the engine brakes, and that's why they didn't apply. Not because of the fact that he was not using the engine brakes and they were bailed off because of one of the nicknames that was called the Pinelli plug. So yeah, that's my that's why it's illegal to use that thing. But anyway. Yeah. There was another good story about an engineer who was working in the yard. Bob Hoyer was his name, and I'll tell you his nickname after this story. He was apparently fooling around with a married woman, somewhere not related to the railroad, but just, I don't know how he met her, but he had this affair going with this woman. And he the woman's husband got wind of it and found out where Bob Hoyer worked. And her husband was a cement truck driver. Bob Hoyer drove a convertible Cadillac. The husband took his cement truck down to the West Oakland yard, found Hoyer's car, and filled it to the brim with concrete. Needless to say, that Cadillac was on the ground, all the wheels were popped, and I never heard how he actually got it out of there. But I'm sure he never fooled around with that woman again. And his nickname was Ready Mix. After that little story, after that little episode. Yeah, so yeah, there were a lot of the old head stories that And I've got a million of them in here, but unfortunately, unless I've got something to trigger my memory, I have a hard time remembering them. A lot of nicknames too, aside from those that I've told you. Just about everybody on the railroad got some kind of a nickname. Quite often it was derogatory, and quite often considered obscene, but they were for a good reason. One of the ladies' men, so to speak, engineers. I can't remember his name right now. It'll come to me anyway. Oh yeah, I can. L.D. Barton. A lot of crew members went by their initials because that's how you were known on the railroad. You just went by your first two initials and your name. So I was K.E. Nichols, like my dad was K.E. Nichols, and that kind of played havoc for that month that we were both still working. Fortunately, I was a switchman, so I was in a different payroll department than he was. But this is kind of a side story. Many years, or not that many, maybe a year after my dad retired, I got this strange check. And this was in the days when checks were handed to you. They didn't even mail them to your house. You had to pick them up at the yard office. And it was payday, and I got two checks, both to K.E. Nichols. Well, one of them had my dad's account number on it, which was different than mine. And so I asked the clerk, what is this check? What is? I don't know. It's just here. It's yours. Take it. So I took it and gave it to my dad, and I said, this came for you today, and he did a little thinking about it because it had a date that it was from, and it was from a couple of years earlier. Apparently he had some time claim for something that was investigated, and the union fought for it, and it went through arbitration and so on and so forth. And then a couple of years later, it finally got paid, and he had retired by then, so the only K.E. Nichols in Oakland was me, so they gave me the check. So anyway, that was kind of strange. But anyway, back to the first part, the first two initials. And this particular ladies' man, his initials were L.D. Barton, and he got the nickname Limberdick because of his fancying the ladies. There was a conductor who was actually robbed at one point at gunpoint, not on the railroad, but somewhere else, and was shot in the head. Well, his initials were LH, and they gave him the nickname Leadhead. Real nice, huh? But he survived, came back to work, and he had a scar. I remember he had a scar somewhere up there, and I asked about it. Oh yeah, that's Leadhead. He got shot in the head. Okay. Yeah. But some of the crews were really hard with young railroaders. They would just play tricks on them all the time. Some of them were harmless. Like one time while riding in the cab of an Alco switch engine that had the handbrake wheel in the cab, right behind where the engineer sat, had a young switchman on there, and they're going down a track in the yard. And when they got up and started moving, the engineer put his hand on the brake wheel. They're going cab forward, and he's going like this. So he says, I need to light up a cigarette here. Kid, you take it. Oh gosh, this young switchman grabs it, and of course everybody in the cab just starts cracking up. One time I had an old head engineer when I was in the yard that liked to chew a lot, and he managed to place a wad of spit right in front of me out of the cab as I'm walking past the cab. All of a sudden, I mean, it drops right in front of me, and I go, oh, what's the matter with you? And he's just looking down at me laughing. His teeth are all gross, from chewing his whole life. And yeah. So anyway, there's a couple of stories that I can tell you that I was involved with. Some of them were kind of good. Some of them were, you know, not so good, although I can laugh about them now. One of the not so good ones was when I was a fireman on a job they called the Richmond Drag, which took traffic from Richmond down into the main yard in Oakland and brought back traffic for Richmond. A satellite yard, about 15 miles from Oakland. And we would run a drag in there every day. And this was a great job. I worked with the best engineer on the railroad. He lived near me, and we just got along real well. And he was from a long SP family also. His name was Errol Oman. And we would trade off on this job all the time. And while one guy was running, the other guy was screwing around, you know. I can't tell you, I mean, just, I don't know, picking up aluminum cans to turn in. So anyway, this one time while we were taking the drag out, which of course everybody was in the cab, the engineer, the fireman, 3 switchmen, pretty crowded in SW 1500. And as we're approaching the SP main line, there's a Y up there, and it's right where the Santa Fe has an overhead on their line leaving Richmond going east. And this particular day, as we come out from behind the buildings, the Santa Fe train is going over the hump over there, and they had some kind of unusual power, whatever it was. Well, the rail fan got the best of me. And I looked up and I said, hey, look at those units over there on the Santa Fe. And then one of the switchmen who was looking where I was supposed to be looking at the Y switch, he hollers out, the points are gapped. And I looked down, and I got it in run 8 because it's uphill. We're doing, you know, a solid 10 miles an hour. And it's like, you know, I just froze. And then Errol says, well, you better plug it. Oh, yeah. Too late. We go on the ground. The first truck tried to go to the right. The rear truck tried to go to the left. And fortunately, we were going uphill, you know, which helped us get stopped in time before the engine tipped over. But I could feel it, you know, because it's wanting to go 2 different ways and it's being pushed by the train. It listed probably, you know, about 30 degrees, and then everything just stopped. I mean, I was ready to grab the brake stand and hold on to it as we went over. Oh my gosh, I'm fired. I'm done. My career's over. And so yeah, they sent out, you know, they sent out the cavalry, and they had a crane out there to lift everything off. There was another job in Richmond, and it was the engine, and I think one car derailed. And so they grabbed the rest of the train and pulled it back down into the yard, and they sent out the equipment to get the engine back up and everything. And of course, at the end, a train master came out and asked, what happened? And to this day, I can't remember how Errol, he should have been a lawyer. I mean, he came up with a reason how it was unavoidable. You know, that switch is supposed to have a lock on it, and the lock was gone, and so on and so forth. And which it's not a main line switch, but they kept a lock on it just for that reason, because kids in North Richmond would come out and, you know, they'll throw a switch anywhere. And anyway, I got no discipline out of it. And I still don't know how Errol managed to talk our way out of it, but he did. And I learned my lesson. Yeah. Put the rail fanning away when you're at work. Yeah, so that was kind of one of the bad ones. After the dust settled, I remembered, I've got my camera with me today. I got to get a picture of this. So I jumped off, ran out of the field, got my picture, which in the picture you can see the foreman calling for help on the radio. And the red Mars light is on, and the engine's leaning, and it's a great picture. But then when I went back up into the cab, he said, "You did that on purpose, just so you could get a picture." yeah, right. So anyway, another fun time, I got called for they called it the backs. It was the OACHT. Oakland to Chicago trailers. And great job. Went on duty about 11:30 at night. Usually the power was on. You'd pull out right out of the piggy rack ramp in Oakland and straight shot to Roseville. So, and then usually a zipper change. You'd pull up to the towpath at the east end of the yard, and if they had to add helpers or more power, they would right out there. Otherwise, the crew would get right on and go. So we had a nice trip going up to Cal P, and we had heard some radio chatter of the, they had a turn that ran out of Roseville that came to Benicia to pick up the North Autos, and North and East Autos. And we heard them talking on the radio, and the dispatcher, again, it was double track, true double track at the time. So they couldn't just cross you over, you know, at random like they can now that it's multiple main track. They had to run against the current of traffic. They had to run eastbound on the westbound main. So we heard a little bit of discussion with the dispatch, or the, yeah, I think they were talking to the dispatcher then. Just before I left down there was when they got repeaters. Prior to that, you had to do all your discussions with the dispatcher through the train order operators at Martinez, Suisun Fairfield, and Davis. You could always get one of them on the radio. So again, we heard some chatter, so we knew they were out there somewhere, but hey, we're getting all green signals, we're happy. Until something that got our attention, as we came around the curve at Suisun Fairfield, then you go on straight track up to a spot called Cannon, where you make another curve towards Davis. And when we came around the curve at Suisun, we see a flashing rear end device ahead of us. But it's okay, it's next to a green signal. So, you know, but when we first saw it, it's like, whoa, oh yeah, okay. They're going against the grain, so no problem. So we've got, they used the fuel conservation speeds, I think, back then, and they would give the hot trains maximum authorized speed, but the junk trains were limited to 40 or 45. I can't remember what it was, just to save fuel. So he's got a 40-mile-an-hour train. We got a 60-mile-an-hour train, so we catch up to him in pretty short order. And I'm thinking, you know, I'll probably never have this opportunity again. This is just going to be too cool. So I was able to slow the train down right to 40, right as our two cabs were next to each other. So here's two trains blasting through the night, and our Mars lights are going around in opposite directions. I mean, it couldn't have been planned any better. So my conductor, he was kind of a jolly joker. His name was Stan Noren. He was an old Cal P conductor, you know, had a lot of seniority. And the engineer on the other train was a guy by the name of Jin Park. Anyway, as we pulled down and we're going neck and neck, unfortunately it was late at night and there aren't a lot of crossings out there. And there was nobody at the few crossings that we saw. So nobody got to witness that except us. The conductor opens his window, the engineer opens his window, and at the very top of his lungs, he screams, "Pardon me, would you have any Grey Poupon?" Which was a popular commercial at the time. And then I thought, oh, if this only could have been filmed, it would have been, you know, a part of the commercial. And we laughed and chuckled, and then Jim hollered over to us, because he was going against the current of traffic. His speed limit through Dixon was 20 because of getting the gates down. He says, I got to slow down to 20 through Dixon. And I tried to talk him into staying at speed. I said, no, stay at 40. We'll get the gates down for you. Don't worry, the gates will be down. Don't worry about it. Well, he was 100%er, so he said he had to slow down. So we bid farewell, and he started slowing down, and we took off. And it probably would have pissed the dispatcher off if we hadn't have separated ourselves by that point, because Davis was where he wanted to cross him back over to the eastbound to go behind us. So if we had gone 40 the whole way, number one, we would have been delayed, and number two, they would have had to stop to wait for us to get out of the way. So, but yeah, that was one of those cool things that you'll never get a chance to repeat. Had another kind of fun but harrowing trip on one of the switch engines out of Olds Hole. Seems like a lot lot of things happened at Ozol Yard. It was a busy yard. For being a yard with only two mainline tracks, a center siding between them, and then 3 yard tracks, they handled an awful lot of traffic in and out of there for that amount of trackage. And when no trains were coming, they used those 2 main lines to, you know, to build cuts and do switching on. So I was on the job called the Crockett Rocket, which went over to the Crockett and switched the big C&H sugar mill that is still there and still getting rail service from what I understand. And so we went over there and we did our switching and got ready to come back to Ozol, and that was our tie-up move for the night. I think it was it was an afternoon job I was on, so this was probably about 9 or 10 at night. And the usual way of doing this was when you get out of the yard at Crockett, again, it was double track main line, so it was all yard limits though. So we didn't have to get authority to go from Ozol to Crockett. Yard limits was our authority, but we still had to you know, go under signal indications. And as a kind of a courtesy, see, one of the things about double track is there's no superiority of trains, but you definitely didn't want to stab Amtrak, and tried not to stab any freight trains either, just because we're just an old switcher, you know, we don't want to delay freight trains. But according to the rules, we could. So this particular night, we didn't realize there was an eastbound coming because we hadn't heard anything on the radio. Hadn't talked to, by this time, we hadn't talked to the operator in Martinez. So there were a couple of electric switch locks to get out of the yard, cross over the westbound to get to the eastbound, and then we were going to go on the eastbound back to Ozol and then just put the engine in the center siding and tie up. So we they went out, the switchman would usually stretch out, you know, one guy would get the first switch, the other guy would get the 2 in the middle, and the other guy would go to the end. And no, I take it back. There were not electric switch locks there. You just had to open the switch and wait 5 minutes. Okay. So they got out in position to do that. They opened the first switch, and now I'm looking towards the east as they're doing this. We were going back light engine, cabs in front, so I can see what they're doing, and I'm watching them. And they open the switch, and as soon as they do, we hear this eastbound call the Martinez operator at that point saying, hey, you got anybody out there? I just got a red in my face. And I looked the other way, and sure enough, there's a Mars light shining up in the sky. Well, it wasn't exactly in his face, but where that signal was, it's on a curve, and then it's a straight track for quite a while. And apparently he had just been coming around the other curve, so he could see it when it went red. And so, of course, he stopped, and since it's yard limits, the Martinez operator didn't know we were out there, and didn't have to. We're still, you know, but we thought, oh well, we stabbed him now. Let's just get the hell out of here and blast off back to Martinez, to Ozol, and get in the clear. So we did that, and because of course the crew didn't hear that, so I just gave a couple of toots on the horn, and I said, okay, we're going, you know, and they, huh? So after they got everything lined behind, you know, I hollered at them as I went by real fast, line behind, hurry up, line behind. They all clamber onto the engine, and we blast off at passenger train speed back for Ozol. And knowing that he'd be coming up behind us pretty soon at restricted speed, I turned off all the lights except the headlight in front I had left on dim. But I turned off the Mars light, turned off all the marker lights, turned off even the step lights so he wouldn't see us out there. And we blasted back to Ozol, got in the clear. I shut the engine down real quick and bailed off, so it looks like it had been parked there for a while. So as far as I know, that crew never found out what caused that signal to go red in their face. Bad order signal. Yeah, that was one we got away with. So, because of course, you know, that 5-minute rule is so that you'll open the switch and wait 5 minutes. So if a train does come like that, you would be able to line the switch back and let them go on a green. Well, we didn't do that. We jumped up in front of them and blasted back to Ozol and really didn't delay them much. So I had another harrowing experience at Ozol one time when I was switching. And we were switching in on those 3-yard tracks that I was telling you about. Well, normally when you did switching, they lined you out across the westbound, through the center siding and out to the eastbound, so you'd have all the track you needed and you could switch with as many cars as you wanted. And this particular day, I was really distracted because I was going through a separation from my first wife. And so I was I was doing the very thing that I swore I would never do, you know, is let my mind drift when I'm on the job. Because I've heard stories from a lot of engineers who would, same thing, they'd been going through divorces and they slipped up somehow. Some of them were major, some of them were kind of minor. So anyway, we grabbed this cut of tank cars, that's all I remember. And because of the fact that Amtrak number 6 was on the light, as the operator would say, coming down off the Martinez Bridge, they had me lined out the tail track, which was only, as I recall, you could only get out there with about 8 or 10 cars. And then it went onto the main line through a hand throw switch protected by a derail. So we came out with this cut, and we were using radios. And, you know, I'm on this side, and long hood forward, and I'm watching for signals. I mean, even though we're using radios, I got my head out the window for whatever reason. And you know, they say, oh yeah, okay, Kenny, 4 cars to go or whatever. And I start using the independent. And I glance down and I can see the main line next to me, which means I'm not on it. I'm on the tail track. And finally the light bulb came on in my head, because I was just thinking, you know, a usual move out over the main line, even though I knew number 6 was coming, or number 5. And I see, and I go, oh shit! And I put the jam on all the way. I did not plug it, but I put it in full service, which gives you more brake cylinder pressure. Turned the sand on, and as I'm looking, you know, out the front of the engine, with my feet up on the bar saying, stop, stop, stop. And the derail disappears from view under the engine, and we're still moving. And number 5's headlight is now leaving the depot. He's coming. And I'm just wishing and hoping, you know, he comes to a stop before click-clunk, click-clunk, click-clunk. Which that probably would have upset the engineer on number 5 enough to where he probably would have plugged it. It would have been a mess. Anyway, that didn't happen. We stopped. And number 5 went by, and I gave him a big highball like everything's cool. Okay, Kenny, back him up. So we went about our switching and we got rid of everything, and then we went to coffee on that tail track. So I pulled down a little farther than normal, jumped off the engine, ran down there, and the sand mark stopped about that far from the derail. So the derail was under the step of the engine, but the wheels did not, you know, that's about as far as I got. That's as far as I had to go before the derail did its job. Yeah, another harrowing experience. Yeah, I've had a few harrowing experiences. So another learning experience that was a puckering experience at the same time. I was on a local out of Suisun Fairfield that went over to Napa Junction, Lombard, went to Vallejo. I don't think we went up into Napa, but anyway, that was plenty of business for that. And we had 3 GP9s, and on the way over, let's see, I think the lead unit had a 26 brake valve. Coming back, it had a 24 RL brake valve on the lead. because we didn't Y them, we just changed ends. And no dynamic. So we're coming down Creston Hill towards Cordelia, which is where it reaches the flat before it goes over to Suisun Fairfield. And I don't know what the percentage on that grade is, but it's kind of similar to Rex Hill. And so we tipped over the top, and we started down. And it had mostly empties, but we had a pretty good sized train. So, you know, I'm not that long out of the simulator, and had a lot of practice by myself. So I made a set with the 24RL, put it in pressure maintaining, and it didn't. Now, I got no dynamic brake, so I can't fall back on that. So the leakage was slowing us down. Well, I don't want to be a wimp and stop and recharge and maybe set retainers. No. I want to keep this thing going. So as I recall, the speed at that time was 20 on that branch. And we got down to about 6 miles an hour and had about a 30-pound reduction in the train line by now, which means it's pretty well depleted. So I put it in release, full release on the 24, and just kind of let it slowly, the speed come back. And when I thought I could go back after the air, I did. And I made a 10-pound reduction, nothing. 15-pound reduction, nothing. Got to about a 35-pound reduction, and it finally grabbed. And not really being that familiar with the concept of bridging between pressure maintaining and release, which you could do, which would trickle a little bit of air back there. Basically, it's a manual way to pressure maintain. Not knowing that, I just pulled the crap out of it with a 30-pound reduction the rest of the way down the hill. And then when I thought I was close enough to the bottom, I could go ahead and kick them off. Well, it was too soon, because by the time we hit the flat, we were up to about 35 miles an hour. And I looked back, and those old Jeep 9s, they're doing this, you know, and the cars are doing that. But by golly, we kept going, and the conductor never said anything. We didn't have a caboose then. He was in the cab with me, and he never complained, so I guess he thought I knew what I was doing. I did tell him, you know, the first time that it leaked off, I said, well, we haven't got any pressure maintaining, so I'll do the best I can. And he never said anything. But again, a learning experience about making an over-reduction and how it does work. You know, a lot of times in the simulator, they tell you, oh, yeah, you piss away your air and it won't do you any good, and so on and so forth. And hey, as long as you don't get it down below, well, I'm already past where emergency probably wouldn't work, but I figured I had it under control at that point. Oh, and feed valve braking would have worked also, but I knew that was against the rules, so I didn't try that. I probably would have after that. Another learning experience was on that same piggyback train, the backs, when we had about 25 cars and 10 units. It was the weekend, and the commute units were going to Roseville to go, you know, in freight service during the weekend, which they did just about every weekend to utilize that power. So I had them all on the backs this one night, and everything seemed to be going pretty good on the way up there. Had all greens. I got slowed down to go through Sacramento okay, using the air and bailing off. But when we came to Roseville, the trains were kind of stacked up. We were second out to get into Antelope. So we got a red signal on the approach signal to Antelope interlocking, because there was a train ahead of us. And even though it's uphill, and I can't remember if I'd used the air or depleted it a little bit or what, but anyway, I was using the air to slow down and bailing off all 10 units. So I've got like 4 million pounds of locomotive that these 25 piggybacks are not slowing us down too well. And I'd go for more, and I'd go for more, and finally it started started getting this, and we did have cabooses then. And I did not want to bunch the train up on my conductor. I wanted him to give him a ride. I was very conscious, you know, when we had cabooses, of giving them a good ride back there. Because when I was a brakeman, I got some not so good rides. And so anyway, I wanted to make a nice smooth stop. Well, we stopped, but about an engine and a half past the red signal. Now, it's an ABS signal, and there's a train in the block, so nobody could tell. You know, the antelope operator wouldn't tell that we were there because there was a train already showing on his board. So, and not wanting to get on the radio and say anything, I thought, you know, it's an old head crew back there. They're not going to step off the back of the caboose and take a piss or something. I just released the air and let the train drift back using the engine brakes till we got back behind the signal. Caboose never said a word to me. Everything was fine. Train ahead of us leaves. We get a yellow. We go on up and we go about our business. And I can't remember what we did with the power. But anyway, when we got the yard office to tie up, the conductor's got kind of a grin on his face. Dave Davison was his name. Real nice guy. He said, "Hey, Kenny, did you use the dynamic to stop?" I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, it must have been dynamic." He said, "Because after we stopped, the caboose rolled back about a car and a half." Oh, yeah, I had it bunched up with the dynamic. Yep, that's right. You know, wink, wink. So, yeah. So, again, that was a learning experience that, yeah, you better get some brakes on those units, either dynamic or independent. So, it was, yeah, it was good. Other harrowing experiences. One time I decided to, again, prove that I was a good hoghead going down to Watsonville. We had, which train did we have? I think we had a junk train going down there. But again, back in the train order timetable schedule days, superiority of trains, south of San Jose, the double track comes together and it's single track from the station of the station of Lick to Coyote, which is, gosh, I can't remember the name of the stations. Anyway, it's double track, or a single track from there all the way down to Gilroy. There's 2 hand throw passing sidings that are down there. And we get at the end of double track, and I'm looking at my watch. We had a caboose. I'm looking at my watch. Boy, it's going to be tight against number 13, Amtrak coming up the coast. We got to get to Gilroy by such and such a time, or else we'll have to stop and head in at one of those 2 sidings, and that will definitely delay them. If we have to stop, lowering the switch, head in, line behind, etc. I think we can make it. So we take off. 60-mile-an-hour track. And I think we still had the limitation that you can only go 55 with empties. But, and it's uphill all the way to Morgan Hill, slight uphill grade, and then downhill into Gilroy. And as with most SP trains, we're not overpowered. So we're kind of not making track speed up to Morgan Hill, and which is kind of killing my time for getting to Gilroy, because we've got to get back onto the double track before his departure time out of Gilroy. So again, I don't want to turn myself in over the radio. We get over the top, and we definitely did a solid 60 going down into Gilroy. Solid 60. And so so now I'm getting real nervous, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, I hope he's late. And I'm not worried about a crash because it's block signal territory. So he's going to get a red at the end of his double track and probably start calling, you know, hey, what's going on out here? But mine are green, and it's a spring switch there at Gilroy. So there's no switch for us or him to line, or nothing for the dispatcher to do. We're green. I'm not hearing them on the radio. We're good. We go by Gilroy, and the operator's going like this as he's out there to roll us by. And I just opened the window and said, and you leave Gilroy and you go around a long sweeping curve to the station of, I can't remember the name of it, where the Hollister branch takes off. And then there's a sharper curve around to the right. we get out there to that Hollister branch, and here comes his headlight. Fortunately, he was a little bit late. And since we got that far into him, he might have gotten a yellow on the approach to this signal at the spring switch. Might have. But he never said anything to us. We never said anything to him. We passed him, and everybody's happy. But again, I could have gotten some major discipline for being on a superior train's time. Because, you know, you had to clear those superior trains. In that case, we just had to clear them by his departure time, not 10 minutes before or some of the other oddities that were out there. And we had no run late on him, so we were definitely not cleared by his departure time. Just thankfully, he was about 6 or 8 minutes late, enough for us to get in the clear. Yeah, so I lucked out on that one too. Didn't get fired. And the conductor never said anything because he was happy just to get to Watsonville and get tied up so we could get out and come back. Yeah, that was again, there were a lot of I'll never do that again type of situations. So I'll fast forward up to my W&P, P&W days. When I first came over, we were severely, or when the railroad first started, we were severely understaffed. And I was assigned to the Mac hauler, or Brooklyn hauler out of Mac, which took all the traffic, you know, into Brooklyn and then got the traffic to come back. And unfortunately, because of that 10-mile-an-hour, you know, restriction that the SP put on all of their branch lines, it was still in effect when we got it. It was a 4-hour trip from Mac to Brooklyn without stops, and a 4-hour trip back. So that didn't leave much for stops, i.e., you know, picking up and setting out at Newburgh. So, and we were shorthanded, so we were being worked every day. And they asked us. I mean, Bob was, you know, are you okay to work, you know, 7th, 8th, the 9th, the 10th day, and so on and so forth. Yeah, we can do it. We toughed it out. So I had a fresh off the street conductor who was a rail fan and fancied himself to be a railroader, because I think he worked for the BN for like one summer when he was in college or something like that. So he had like 3 months of experience, and I think all he worked was through freight as a head brakeman. Get on in the cab and ride and get off at the other end. So anyway, we were tired. I think we had worked 10 days straight when this particular event happened. And when we first got this line, the SP still had it as far as Springbrook, just out of Springbrook. Our lease went up to Springbrook, and then we were on the SP the rest of the way, you know, into Cook and on into Brooklyn. And they were still operating the line to Hillsboro. So it was all DTC at the time, so we had to get DTC blocks for our run from Springbrook on in. And there were 5 blocks. I can't remember the names of all of them, except the last one, the Menifee block. And this particular day, we usually called the SP dispatcher when we were getting ready to leave Newburgh, after we got done with our work there, and we'd get our blocks from there on in. So the normal procedure was we'd get all 5 blocks, Eastward Authority and all 5 blocks, the Springbrook through the Menifee, whatever. So she gave us that authority like that. We repeated it back to her, the conductor did, and then instead of saying that is correct, she said, oh, wait a second, I need to change that. So she gave us Eastward Authority in the first 2 blocks, working time in the 3rd, Eastward Authority in the 4th, and no authority in the last one. She just kind of didn't mention that one. So he repeated back that authority, and she said that is correct. And so I copied it down all on my sheet also, so I'd have reference right there. And we went on about our way. Well, we got delayed in that one that we had joint working time in, because I think the Hillsboro switcher was out there or something. And so we got delayed by them. And so then we took off and went through them and went through the fourth one, and we got to the Menifee block and we just motored right on into it as if we owned it. And then the usual MO was we'd go up to, there's a crossing right there in Milwaukee. I can't think of the name of it. It used to be called the Old Milwaukee Interchange. They had some old yard tracks there at one time because they interchanged with the PEP. Oh, what do they call it? The Portland Traction Company. Anyway, so the yardmaster called and said, yeah, I'm going to hold you out there at Milwaukee Interchange. We'll let you know when we got a track for you. Okay, so we pull down and stop and dial back the chairs and kind of zone out. After a few minutes, the radio comes to life and it's the dispatcher calling. And she said, 4368 East. What I thought she said was, can you give the Menifee block back now? And I was kind of blurry and I said, put the rope around my neck and tightened it. No, I can't give you the Menifee block back. We're sitting in it. Silence. She comes on and says, 4368 East with Engineer Nichols. You're authorized eastward 1 block Menifee. I pull out the paper and, oh, shit. And Randy, my conductor, he's over there. What? What's the problem? I said, just put the noose around your neck, tighten it up. So I repeated it back to her. She said, that is correct. And I thought, okay, maybe she'll let it slide. Maybe. And maybe nobody in the Portland area heard that, even though we're on the SP channel, and so everybody, of course, did hear it. So we sat there for like another half hour till they got a track ready for us, and the yardmaster called and said, okay, we're going to bring you into such and such track, and when you get up to the other end, cut the power off, bring it back the other track, and tie it down. Oh, this is not good. And come into the yard office. Yeah, they were there to take us out of service right there, because we had entered the Menifee block without authority, which of course is decertifiable. So our road foreman at the time, Kurt Penny, was more like a combination road foreman and local chairman. He asked us what happened. We explained it to him, took all of our notes and our paperwork and everything. And the SP road foreman was there, Bill Weaver, who was nicknamed the Weave. And he said, well, I can't decertify you because I didn't certify you. But he said, but you're going to be restricted off the SP for an undetermined amount of time. And I said, oh, I'm going to be restricted off my own railroad here pretty soon. So anyway, yeah, they relieved us of duty and took us back, carry-hauled us back, brought another crew out to get the train. And so in the course of the investigation, they, and Kurt Penny gave me the advice. He said, don't sign for it. He says, I know you're admitting to it. You know what you did. You're guilty of sin. But he said, don't sign for it or else you waive your right to an appeal. He said, hopefully we can do something. We know, and Kurt Penny said this, we know you were overworked and tired and not thinking straight, and really we shouldn't have had you out there that long, so let me work on it. So anyway, he got the tapes from the SP or sent for the tapes on the radio conversation. And the ones they sent back were the wrong time period. They had the recording of her giving us the Menifee block the first time, but it didn't have the recording of her giving us originally all 5 blocks and then taking it back. She didn't actually take it back, but she, you know, there was confusion. That was the thing, is that she sowed the seeds of confusion. So he applied to them for the other tape that had that recording on it. In the meantime, the 10-day time limit ran out. And since the 10-day time limit ran out, they couldn't proceed with the, you know, with the charges. And so he handed me my card back and said, well, you know, it's a learning experience for all of us. And so, yes, I was decertified for a couple of days, but not really. And so, because if it was decertified, I would have had to been off the prescribed time and so on and so forth. It was just, never mind, here's your card back. And by the way, you're going to be on the Mac Switcher now. We're going to keep you away from the SP for a while. Yeah, so that was, I should have brought my prop over. I've got a prop for that too. Yeah, that was kind of a fun time. But my conductor was really no help. He would copy the authority from the dispatcher, but he didn't really have a clue what it meant in detail. He had a hard time with the whole concept of short line railroading, branch line railroading, you know, pickups and set outs and blocking trains and stuff like that. He was pretty good on the rules, but, you know, only to the extent of answering questions on a test, not so much applying them. He quit after about 6 months, maybe not even that long, and then eventually got hired back by the BN and became an official over there. Actually became a dispatcher first and went down to Fort Worth, and then came back here as a train master. And when the P&W got the rest of the OE, he was the last BN train master in Salem before we got it, took it over. And he's been retired for quite a while. And he would laugh about this story too, so I can mention his name, Randy Nelson. He's a well-known rail fan, pictures all over the internet and so on and so forth. He doesn't talk about that much very often, but we have kind of a funny saying amongst each other, and it is, in his gravelly voice, "Hey Bob, what do I do?" Because when he was on the Mac Switcher, every time we'd get in radio range of Mac Depot, he would call Bob Karskaden on the radio and ask him, what do we do? What do we do coming down into Newburgh? And Bob would say the same thing you do every day. Set out your Newburghs there and come on over to St. Joe and so on and so forth and so on. But yeah, so the story about the significance of the Menifee block and having almost been decertified in the Menifee block, or as a result of the Menifee block. A couple of years later, when the Genesee and Wyoming created the Portland and Western and leased out pretty much the rest of the SP branches on the west side of the valley, they, you know, once we got them, we did away with DTC blocks. And so at that time, I was a road foreman and Bob Karskaden was a train master. And so we decided to go over to just outside of Lake Oswego, where the sign at the end of the, can't remember, the Cook block maybe, no, it was the Lake Oswego block, and the Menifee block began. Went out there and Bob hoisted me up on his shoulders because these signs were pretty high. They were, you know, at cab level, and with our wrenches unbolted the famous Menifee block sign that got me in trouble. So obviously it needs to be cleaned up a little bit, which I will do. But yeah, still have a reminder of one of my boo-boos on the railroad. So after about 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, our road foreman, Kurt Penny, decided he'd had enough. He had some issues with some of the other managers, and so he went back to his SP seniority. And it was soon enough he didn't lose any seniority. But then he retired from the SP. So I was offered the road foreman's job and got very little training on that position. So it was definitely on-the-job training, self-taught. And the principle that I applied was that think back of the officers that you knew on the SP, the good ones versus the bad ones, and emulate the good ones and just don't do what the bad ones did. And that really helped. And as far as organizing and conducting rules classes, I did the same thing. I thought back of the instructors that I had, like at the simulator, and some of the ones I had elsewhere, like when I first hired out, and followed the example that the good ones gave and tried to stay away from what the not so good ones were. And I really enjoyed teaching the classes. And I felt like it was an opportunity to teach the new hires, you know, the right way to do things, and what happens if you do it the wrong way, and or what could happen if you could do it the wrong way. And fortunately, had a few stories to tell that illustrated those points. Like a break-in partner that I had one time when I was laying off, and he was on a run and decided to close an angle cock before the movement stopped because he could just lift the pin and the cars would roll away and go into emergency. Well, he tripped up and lost his leg above the knee for doing that. And so, you know, all it takes is one mistake. And I used to tell people, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, think of the worst thing that could happen. I mean, and do that a lot, even when you don't think anything bad could happen. You're walking by yourself in the yard and there's no equipment around you moving or anything like that. Still think about the worst thing that could happen. But definitely when you're in a bad position. And a lot of the illustrations, like the Pinelli plug, you know, the guy that put 3 units in the drink because he had a plug in. Well, I used to have to relieve a lot of crews that died on the law because early on we didn't have an Extraboard, and when we did, there weren't many people on it. And so I'd get the phone call from our train dispatcher, who was also the crew dispatcher, and he'd say, "Kenny," it was Dennis. And when I heard that greeting, I knew, oh well, get your gloves on. So I had an easy one night right here in Sheridan. The Willamina was dying right out there by Highway 18, or was actually dead. So they had gotten a taxi ride in, and so I just drove myself down there, and then my wife was going to come pick me up at Whiteson and get the train back to Whiteson. So I climb onto the engine and turn on the light. It was I forget which unit. It was probably the 1853. I think it was on there for a long time. And look for the warrants and get ready to go. And I was sitting in the engineer seat, facing forward, and a car drives up and pulls off the highway right there at the crossing. It's a truck. In fact, it's that truck right over there. The engineer on the job comes up and he gets in the cab, and he's got kind of the sheepish look on his face, and immediately I knew. Looked down, yep, there's a plug in the independent. He had hoped to retrieve it before I got out there. Apparently they got back to Mac, they got tied up. He drove all the way back out from Mac, and too late. So, you know, my approach to stuff like that was, you know, you remember the Pinelli story. I know you do it. I know a lot of other people have done it. I've done it myself. So you know, but there's a reason that it's against the rules. So I tried to use illustrations like, you know, from my experience on, you know, why there's just some rules you don't want to break. Others, they're going to be broken. But think about the worst thing that could happen if you break this rule. You know, if you're going to feed valve, okay, you might accidentally release the brakes when you think you're setting them. And I mean, there's a reason for it, because that can happen. And so, yeah, it was good to do stuff like that. But then there were times also, you know, when I had to administer or discipline. We hated to fire people. I mean, from the beginning, Bob Melbo, you had to really do something bad to get fired. Basically, you had to lie about whatever it was you did. That would get you fired quicker than whatever it was that you did. And because he looked at it the same way, you know, use it as a learning experience rather than a punitive experience. And so, but there were a few people that we just had to let go. And one of them was a guy who had me up on assault charges, believe it or not. Is a young conductor, switchman, and he was just a big screw up. He was the son of one of our conductors, and he was an ex-Marine in his early 20s, thought he knew everything, you know, and was just, as one of our conductors described him, a loose cannon. He had made several screw-ups, you know, over his career. He got the Bronco in Albany stolen one night when he stopped at Safeway for a snack when he was on the switcher, and not only left the keys in it, but left it running, and when he came out, it was gone. Now, by my way of thinking, that would have been a firing, you know, offense right there, but he didn't get fired over it. And so it came down to a situation where he made some disparaging remarks about one of our engineers' wives, and it got reported. And of course, you know, we're getting into the kinder, gentler age. Oh, I mean, I can tell you stories about disparaging remarks going back, you know, that made this situation tame. But again, now the company's worried about lawsuits and so on and so forth. So I had the not so enviable position of telling him that he was up for an investigation. And where this happened was he was on the Eugene hauler on his way back from Eugene, and him and his engineer died at Shed, I think it was. And so again, Kenny, we need relief for the Eugene hauler. So I got they found one of our conductors, and we drove down there and relieved them with enough time for them to drive back to Albany, tie up. But when we were there, I had to serve him his investigation notice and tell him what it was for and so on and so forth. And he got really upset, to say the least. But now there's 4 people here. I've got 2 other witnesses as to what actually happened. Well, we got the train back into town, tied up, went home. The next morning I get a call from Brian Enfield, our operations manager, that said, Sergeant so-and-so at the Oregon State Police wants to talk to you. Yeah, I laughed. I said, oh, come on, Brian. It isn't April Fool's Day. What are you talking about? No, really. Apparently this guy had filed assault charges with the Oregon State Police, claiming that I grabbed him by the arm and whipped him around to tell him that he was up for an investigation because he was just walking off, which he was walking off after I gave him the papers. And so I had the interview with the Oregon State Police. They read me my rights, took my statement, and when it was over, the officer said, well, yeah, this sounds like a disgruntled employee situation. He said, but we have to investigate it. So they ended up contacting the other 2 crew members and getting their side of the story. And they, you know, corroborated what I had to say, that no, RJ is nuts. Nothing like that ever went on. And needless to say, that got him fired for good, at least at this company. So that was not a fun experience. We had another person that had multiple screw-ups, but again, you know, you had to kind of do bad things to really get fired here, and had gotten some discipline, although she was very, she was a likable person and she wanted to do a good job, but she just was not catching on. So she was a conductor on the Toledo hauler for a while, which wasn't too involved. She was a conductor on the rock train when we still had, when it first started, and we had, even though it was remote, we still had a conductor. Again, no switching involved, just go from here to there and dump the train and go back. Well, anyway, I was there in Mac in my office one day, and Jim Wilbanks, the roadmaster, was in there, and it was first thing in the morning, and he was kind of hot and sweaty, and his assistant was in there with him, and I said, geez, Jim, where you been this morning? Out there swinging a spike mole already? And he said, yeah, I had to fix the switch at the west end of the house track. I said, oh, what happened? Well, you know, right immediately he thought, oh gosh, I shouldn't have said anything. Oh, well, I don't want to, I said, come on, let me know what happened. I said, you know, we'll handle it accordingly. So what had happened was that while doing a power swap with the Westsider Power, she had gotten on this, the unit in, I think they had to set a unit out in the house track and then go back against their power on the main line. So they set it out, she shut it down, put the brakes on, but didn't tie a handbrake. Well, it was one of our old leaky SD9s and it leaked right off. And by the time they cut off and went out to the main line and lined back, it was already on its way out. So the engineer had to goose it to get out of the way for that engine to roll out through the switch and down into the swale where it stopped and rolled back, or, you know, went up the other side and eventually settled down there. And so they got right on it to fix the switch. Anyway, that was her undoing. She finally got fired over that. And then filed a claim, you know, a discrimination suit against the company, and I had to go testify over that no, she wasn't fired because she was a woman. She did this and almost caused, you know, thousands of dollars worth of damage by her neglect. And she had been through the engineer's class. In fact, I got ripped on that because I would not certify her, because I went for her initial check ride and it was on the Corvallis local. The first thing, she couldn't even figure out how to get the engine started. It was the 1801, and she was the conductor on the, had been the conductor on the Corvallis, and had been working with Gary, the conductor, and with Scott, the engineer. And so I thought, well, that should be a good one for her to take her check ride on. On my form, there were like 12 different things that she did wrong, you know, starting with not being able to figure out how to get the engine started. It's because she didn't put the 3 switches up on the control stand, the control and fuel pump and the engine run switches. And she was just scratching her head, looking at all the switches on the back wall. And I said, well, you're cold. Anyway, long story, yeah. But that same general manager that I had problems with, because that was probably one of the nails in my coffin, is that I would not certify her because she didn't pass her check ride. But she at least knew enough to tie a handbrake on that engine when she shut it, or when she cut away from it, before she cut away from it. Anyway, yeah, that was a nerve-wracking experience. And there were several others over the years that had gotten fired, like I say, because of multiple infractions. One guy was a real hard worker, but he was spinning his wheels most of the time, you know, doing more running around than he needed to and making more moves than he needed to, and he was always in a hurry. And he was going to roll some cars by out at St. Joe, back when we could do that, and well, they cornered some other cars that were not quite in the clear yet, and so yeah, that was the nail in his coffin. And Bob Melville said, I hate to have to fire that guy, but we just can't afford to keep him anymore. Because all of he had eight human factor accidents that all involved, money. So, yeah, we just couldn't afford to keep him anymore. So, yeah, that was the bad part about being the road foreman. The good part was training people on doing the right way, especially running engines. I really enjoyed going out and doing their initial check rides, and some even before, like if I was doing a yearly check ride with an engineer and he had a student engineer with him that had a chance to run, I'd say, put him to work. Let's give him some practice. And tried not to stand over their shoulders, because I hated that what engineers would do with me. So if I had to see something, I'd usually look over the control stand, because I hated it when people were behind me. But yeah, it was good. And there were a few test failures that I overlooked because I treated them as learning experiences, Yeah, I guess you'll never see a fusee and think it's a Coke can anymore, will you? Yeah. Torpedoes. Oh gosh, that was another one. Torpedoes were, still in use, and so they were good tests. So I put 2 down up at Wren's to test the Toledo hauler. In fact, Dan Butler reiterated this story in one of his posts about how his conductor, Mickey Simmons, went through the roof when this torpedo went off under the overpass, which made it even louder. And this happened to be right at the time when that neighbor down there was shooting at the Freds. Oh gosh, they got stopped down. I was waiting for them with a fusee down around the curve, and they got stopped, and I got up in the engine, and that conductor was had I think 3 cigarettes going, one in his mouth and one in each hand. And sorry Mickey, I just wanted to make sure you could hear it. Yeah, those were good. And then on the fun side, highly against the rules, is we were able to put engines on display for the summertime festivals around. Like we'd put one in Newburgh, McMinnville, Willamina. I think they did Corvallis one time I wasn't involved with. But the one in Willamina was during Turkey Rama. And so we just put it on the house track right next to the dock and start it up. And people could just step across and walk through the cab and along the catwalk and look at the engine, and we'd run it long enough to build the air pressure up and then shut it off and let kids blow the horn and so on and so forth. Well, Bob, he wasn't a train master at the time, he had another title, but he brought his camper down and just stayed down there, which Turkey Rama back then used to go, I think, 2.5 days. So he just camped out down there, and so we were sitting out on the platform having a barbecue, and the West Sider was leaving, and the engineer was an XSP guy who hired out in 1962, the best engineer we had. I never worried about when he was running the train. Anyway, he was regular on the West Sider, and so Bob and I put about 15 torpedoes in succession that made it sound like machine gun fire right in front of the depot. Yeah, that was fun. But torpedo tests were fun. In fact, I guess it would probably never get out, but I actually pulled one on an former SP road foreman. That guy that I was telling you about, the Weave, he went back to his seniority eventually. And I was out doing something in Albany, and I was switched to the SP channel, and I heard, I was in the van, the company van, and I heard the Weave on the radio going westbound, approaching Albany. And I was just getting ready to leave, I think, to head home. It was late afternoon, like 5 o'clock. And I thought, oh, this is too good of an opportunity, the Weave. And so I headed south. I got down to Tangent or somewhere down there, and I put a couple of torpedoes down. Then I drove around behind the bushes and weeds and waited for them, and pow! Pow! Gosh, what was the dispatcher's number? I forget. Anyway, 9600 West, SP dispatcher. I just got a couple of guns out here at Tangent. Okay, all right. So anyway, they slowed down to restricted speed and went their 2 miles, and they left. I don't think I followed them to check if it was 2 miles, but there you go, Bill. I got back at you after all those tests you pulled on me. He was a short guy, and he had little man syndrome, and he was kind of hyper, you know, and so he actually took a check ride with me one time when we were on a train going to Eugene. We had to head in down at that second switch. I can't remember the name of it. Not Irving, but that one that's in the middle of the yard. I don't know, maybe gone now. But anyway, we had to stop and line ourselves in, and I just made a grandstand stop right down there, and I could tell he was getting nervous. You know, he was kind of raising up in his seat and stop. Bill said, "Oh, okay, I'll get off here now. Good job." So he actually did give me a compliment one time. Although one time he came storming, I was on a switch engine, and he came storming out of the shanty because we were at, we weren't actually at coffee. We had gotten in the clear while one of the other jobs had come out of coffee, and they were getting on their engine to go to the other end of the yard. So we were just in the clear for them. So we hadn't been in there just, I don't know, a minute, and here comes Weaver storming out of the shanty, and he's wagging his finger at me, and so I opened the back door. "Hey, Bill, how you doing?" He said, "You're supposed to shut those engines down anytime you stop. You need, if you're going to beans, going to coffee, you need to shut the engine down." And I went, "Well, if you look behind you, there's my crew coming back out to go back to work, and they're out there giving me a signal." And he looks around and he says, "Oh, okay." Stops off. Yeah. So that was just his way, you know. He shot first and asked questions later. So his road foreman skills were not ones I ever employed. But he eventually went back to his seniority. I don't know why, and don't know how long before he retired, but he's got to be retired now because he was probably 10 years older than I was. But yeah, it was fun, and the thing about Bob is he let me do my job. He didn't micromanage. You know, he knew that I spent the time to investigate, learn what I needed to do. I went to several FRA seminars, and so I pretty much had everything under control, and he was happy with that. And he wasn't trying to tell me how to do my job. He was certified also, so I had to give him a check ride every year. And we always planned it for one day when Scott Perry was on vacation, so he could do it on the Corvallis local. He loved working that job because he loved the way Gary Dahlman could plan 10 moves ahead. You know, he could plan tomorrow's moves and get them set up today. You know, he was one of the best car handlers I've ever worked with. I mean, I worked with him back on the SP also, and they were really fortunate to get him to come over. Which he came over so he could stay, you know, in Albany or Corvallis as the case was, and he had things running very smooth over there. Great rapport with the customers. In fact, Tom Creswell said he's the best customer service guy we have on the WP. And but anyway, so it was fun giving Bob his check ride, and he did a pretty good job for, you know, not having, like I would like to say, been a real engineer, you know, out there handling big trains and stuff like that. But he was certified. Originally when they started, they certified him and made him a DSLE so he could check ride Kurt Penny. And that was the only reason. So they did their check rides, and so we did the same thing. He'd run the first half of the shift, and then I'd run the second half, and he'd do my check ride, and okay, we're good for now. And we were the only ones. And then George Lavico, we made him a DSLE, and so we didn't have to do Bob so much anymore. And then after Bob left, things just went to hell. Really. And it wasn't actually when Bob left, it was when the parent company went public, sold stock, added a couple layers of management who did try to micromanage the WP. And so we started getting their influence. You got to do it this way, you got to do it that way. And that was just not fun anymore. So it didn't break my heart to go back to my seniority. In fact, like I said, it was a big relief. Big relief. I got into a couple of discussions with some of our people on the corporate level that thought I wasn't doing my DSLE job right, and so, but I got along okay with the FRA inspectors. They would write up a few things wrong here and there. Mostly, you know, with the crews, they wrote up a couple of discrepancies I had in the files and, you know, the records. But yeah, I got them all rectified and everything was good. Especially since one of them was a rail fan, and he originally worked for the Erie, even before the Erie-Lackawanna, I believe, and got his FRA job off of the Erie-Lackawanna, but he was not in the operating department. So what do? The FRA makes him an operating inspector. And he came out here not really knowing much about operations. He actually learned a lot from me. Anyway, he sat in and evaluated both my first day of class and my last day of class in one of my trainman's classes. And he wrote a report on it and said no exceptions. So I was happy, you know, that he was happy the way we were training our people, which I think was better than most lines. No, in fact, I can tell you it was better than most short lines, I should say, because we had some people come to work here that were certified by their previous short line, and it was like they said, okay, this is how you start it, this is the throttle, this is the brake, this is the reverser, now don't screw up. That was their training, literally. So I think we did a pretty good job. And anyway, another thing that endeared him to me was one of the years that we had the steam engines out running around. Specifically, it was the 700 on the, what was it, the Beaverton something festival, and in conjunction with the historical groups were running excursion trains during this that ran out of Beaverton over to Hillsboro, around the Y, over to Cook, around the Y, and made 4 trips a day. And so I put myself on there as the pilot, of course. And the first morning we show up, I see Rich Panisi. He comes up, and says, "Hey Kenny, any chance of getting up in the cab, taking a few pictures?" "Rich, just show me your badge. You can go anywhere you want." And he said, "Nope, I'm not working today. I'm off duty." I said, "Get on up there." So he got up in the cab and then rode 1 round trip in the cab, and then took some pictures on the shot on the ground shots of the train going by. In fact, he used a Hasselblad. You're talking about Hasselblads. He took some good pictures, and I'm kind of surprised I haven't seen pictures on Facebook that he's done. But he even did a book on the Erie-Lackawanna. Brian has a copy of it. Gave me a nice 8x10 of me running the 700 coming under the overpass at Tigard. And so I thought that was awfully nice of him. Didn't have to do that. It was displayed in my office when I had an office. And so, yeah, I got along good with him. But yeah, it was overall a good experience being the road foreman. It was very, it was a learning experience. And I'd heard somewhere along the line that if you really want to learn something, teach it. And boy, is that sure the truth. You know, I must admit, I was pretty good on the G-Corps, you know, in and out, finding or knowing the right information, and if I didn't, finding it in a hurry. And, you know, I knew the whole railroad. I was qualified on the railroad, knew all of the employees. I miss that now. You know, if I see a P&W train, I more than likely don't know anybody on it, you know, and that's kind of sad, but time marches on. So it's like if I ever see the Mack switcher going between Mack and Newburgh, I always try and pull over and wave, because I know it's probably going to be Richard and Juanita, or at least one of them. Yeah. And until Run 2 Ted retired, I used to wave at him down here on the Willamina. They come through town about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so I'd time my dog walk for that, so I'd get down there and see him. But that is in fact, I'm kind of overdue for a ride on Wes with Pat and Dave Robertson, who were on my old job. because I like to visit with the guys. And so, yeah, it was fun. It was a fun 45-year career on the railroad. I got a couple of, oh, really? Strange reactions when I was talking to the Railroad Retirement Board, getting my retirement set up and everything. They checked all my records and everything, and they said, "Wow, really? You've got that many months, whatever 45 years equates to months. I can't remember now, but you've got X number of months. Wow, you're going to get a good check." I said, "Yeah, I know. That's why I stayed so long." And it reminded me of when I first hired out, when I was a brakeman down at the Warm Springs Auto Plant, GM plant down in Fremont, working with a bunch of old heads, because those were really cushy jobs, good hours. I mean, when GM said jump, they said how high. They took care of GM, their biggest customer on the Western Division. But one day we were sitting around at coffee or beans or something, and everybody's in the shanty, and they're all talking about, "Well, yeah, I've got a year and a half to go. I've got 6 months to go, and I'll have 38 years. I'll have 36 years." And I said, "Fellas, I've got 40 years to go." So I'll be there with you one of these days. Well, 40 years turned into 45, and the other thing is they said, "Oh, there won't be no railroad retirement by that time." He said, "You'll be part of Social Security, so you better invest your money, kid, because you won't be getting nearly as much as we are." They were wrong. Railroad retirement has been solvent ever since and doing way better than Social Security. So, yeah, looking back, they were wrong. But I'm happy, because I kind of miss the railroad, but not really. I don't miss having to do it. If I could just say, "Oh, it's a nice day, I think I'll go run the Willamina today." No, can't do that. So if I was obligated to do it, even if we still had part-timers, I don't think I would, because there would be that call, "Kenny, we need you for the West Sider." But at least as a part-timer, I could say, "Oh, no thanks, bye." Yeah, I miss it a little bit. The railroad dreams have kind of tapered off, though, I must say. For the first couple of years, almost every night I was having some kind of railroad dream. It was either early in my career, or it had nothing to do with my career, or it was later in the career. Sometimes they were very realistic. Sometimes they were just off into outer space. But they finally tapered off. I only have maybe 1 or 2 a month now instead of 3 or 4 a week. But they don't bother me. The neat thing, though, is when I would have this dream, I think, wait a second, my subconscious would know I'm retired. How could I be back working? This just doesn't make sense. They're going to dock my railroad retirement because I'm back working. And then I'd wake up. Oh, it was just a dream. Time to get up and have a cup of coffee and relax, enjoy the atmosphere. So anyway, I think that pretty much covered my stories for now, until more of them get jogged from the back of my memory. But it is amazing things that you don't know you remember until something jogs your memory. And I've experienced that phenomenon several times recently, like especially at my 50-year high school reunion. But I'll think of more. So I'll let you know when they come up. I've thought of a couple of them just as we're sitting here. Like one time going down to Watsonville on a sugar beet train, going into San Jose Yard, and the herder, which we had back then, said, "Oh yeah, you're all lined up." Well, we weren't, so we were lined into the wrong track. The engineer plugged it, and like 60 sugar beet cars ran in at once, and the caboose, it was like hitting a brick wall. But of course we heard the air go first, so we knew, get ready, and then wham. Well, the funny part is that the conductor was this old-timey crazy guy. I mean, he was good to work with, but he was odd. He used to heat his coffee up on the caboose stove in a coffee can with just water and grounds in the bottom of the coffee can. That's how he made his coffee. Well, this was San Jose, halfway through the run, and so they were pretty well heated. I think he'd had a couple of cups of it, but there was still some in there. And when we hit that brick wall, the can tipped over and it all went on the stove. And of course, all of the coffee just immediately vaporized, but then the grounds started burning rather quickly. And boy, did they stink up that caboose. The rest of the way to Watsonville, even though it was kind of cold out that night, both doors open and all the windows open to get rid of that stinky burnt coffee smell. Ugh. Yeah. Oh, and then there's the caboose story. You got time for one more? A friend of mine was regular in the pool from Oakland to Watsonville, and there was a conductor in that pool that he didn't particularly care for. They used to butt heads. I'm not quite sure why, but they did not get along. The engineer's name was Lee Barnett. The conductor's name was Roy Grace, and they were on a piggyback train coming. It was the coast piggyback train up from LA overnight to Oakland, and they got it out of Watsonville and they're approaching Oakland, and they're approaching Mulford, where a lot of locals used to work, and ABS territory, yard limits, and all of a sudden a signal goes from green to red. So, not having to plug it, knowing that it's probably the local going to work about 3 blocks ahead of us, but also knowing that he had a dynamiter in this train, the engineer makes a set, and it was like a 7,000-foot train, okay? All piggybacks, very few container cars back then, and you always had a possibility of having a dynamiter on these piggyback cars. And he had one, and knowing it, just before he goes to set the air, he says to the brakeman, "I'm going to kill that cocksucker." Hits the air, the emergency goes in, and he doesn't bail off or anything. He lets the engine brakes set up. Wham! The caboose hits like a brick wall, just like ours did. Not at yard speed, but at like 40 miles an hour. But still, it was enough to launch Roy off the chair. And we were down to just a conductor and 1 brakeman at the time, so he had nobody back there with him. So anyway, they screech to a halt, and the radio crackles to life, and Lee, it's the conductor, Roy on the caboose, and he says, Barnett, I'm hurt back here. Call me an ambulance." And he says, "Okay, Roy, you're an ambulance." Oh gosh, yeah, that was one of those stories. "Okay, Roy, you're an ambulance." Yeah, so, but there was a lot of animosity between certain crew members, but most of the time everybody got along well. I tried to get along with everybody. I can't ever remember having any. I had some pretty heated discussions at times, but no arguments, no animosity between people. Not enough to cause a grudge. Anyway, yeah, that's it.